We've seen that in markets where buyers and sellers have different information, that we can get multiple equilibria, and the equilibrium we get depends on what buyers expect the equilibrium to be. The one we've looked at previously is one in which only the low quality goods were sold because that's what people expected to occur. That example was actually, though, too simple. What happens can be much worse than what that example suggests. In fact, the market can simply collapse or disappear. And this is actually what George Akerlof observed in his analysis of the market for used cars. So let's see how that might work in a slightly more complicated example than we've done before. And to introduce this idea, all we really need to do is to add another, even worse type of used cars. So let's imagine that used cars are good, bad, or lemons. And the idea here is that used cars that are lemons are worthless. Neither buyers nor sellers put any value on them. Again, the seller knows the value or quality of his car and the buyer doesn't. So let's put in some numbers. Let's suppose that buyers think good cars are worth 12 and sellers think they're worth 10. Buyers think bad ones are worth 6 and sellers think bad ones are worth 4. And everybody, of course, thinks the lemon's worth nothing. It's just worthless. Notice in this example, just as we had before, that all the cars that are either good or bad would trade if everybody could tell what they were. Good cars would trade for a price between 10 and 12, and bad ones would trade for a price between 6 and 4. Okay. Let's suppose, to get our example off the ground, that if you look out there among all the used cars, not necessarily the ones offered for sale, just among all that are out there, that 1/3 are good, 1/3 are bad, and 1/3 are lemons. But buyers can't tell which is which. Well, now to analyze this, we have to come up with an idea of what buyers expect. Let's first suppose that buyers are optimistic and they expect that all used cars that sellers are contemplating selling actually get offered for sale. Well, then they would think that 1/3 of the cars are of each type, and all we have to do is compute the expected value of a used car that's selected at random to a buyer. That would be 1/3 of 12 plus 1/3 of 6 plus 1/3 of 0. And that's 6. 6 would be the most that a buyer is willing to pay for a randomly selected used car. That's, of course, more than a lemon's worth. It's more than a bad one's worth. But it's less than a good used car is worth to a seller who has a good used car and knows it's good. So sellers of good used cars wouldn't sell their cars. Because we made the buyers as optimistic as we possibly could have made them, the highest price we could get is 6. That means that good used cars cannot be sold in any equilibrium. Buyers should know this. So the best they could expect and have any chance of being correct is that good used cars are simply kept by the sellers. Anything offered for sale is either bad or lemon. Well, let's ask what happens in that case. So now we have to compute the expected value to a buyer of a used car when a buyer knows that there's only bad ones and lemons. Well, remember, in our example, there's equal numbers of bad cars and lemons, so a buyer would think that a randomly selected car from among those offered for sale has a half chance of being bad and a half chance of being a lemon. So their expected value of a random car here is half of 6 plus half of 0, and that's 3. That 3 is more than 0. Sellers of lemons are happy, but it's less than the value that a seller who has a bad used car places on his car. Remember, that was 4. He's not going to sell it. That means that these expectations can't be correct either. In fact, the only expectations that can be correct is that any used car offered for sale is a lemon. Now, you could view that as a used car market that works in some sense and that the lemons actually get traded, but because they're worthless to everybody, it's probably better to think about it as a case in which the market simply disappears or collapses. Nothing's traded because there are no expectations that buyers can have that would result in behavior verifying those expectations. Other than that, nothing of value is traded. Now, buyers and sellers in this kind of market, of course, are not going to be happy with this outcome because there are plenty of people who'd like to trade if only they could be sure of the quality of what they're buying. Sellers in this market have a real incentive to try to do something to distinguish their car. And you can't do it by just saying your car is good or bad and not a lemon, because why would anyone believe that? It's always in the interest of someone with a lemon to say the car is good. So it's got to be something that's actually a useful signal. And a standard way to do this is to offer some kind of insurance, either a certified used car market or a warranty. So a seller might say, look, my car is good. I'm going to guarantee that it's good by saying that anything goes wrong with it, I'll fix, or I'll certify it as a used car guaranteeing that I've actually fixed everything wrong. As long as that insurance is cheaper to provide for sellers of good cars than for sellers of bad cars or lemons, that insurance can serve as a signal that the car is in fact good, and buyers will be willing to pay more for it. But then notice what would happen. If that's the case, then buyers know that any car that doesn't have insurance is either a bad car or a lemon. Sellers of bad cars are unhappy with that because buyers aren't willing to buy cars if they know that they're all going to be bad or lemons. So this gives sellers of bad used cars an incentive to provide some kind of lesser insurance, and we could go on down the list. If it's possible to provide this sort of signal, then everyone wants to do it, except of course the seller with a lemon where there's nothing he can do. Now, this is all done in the context of the used car market because it's an easy example to think about. It's actually reasonably accurate for what goes on in that market, but it applies much more broadly. For example, it applies on eBay. eBay runs a reputation system in which sellers want to signal that they're actually sellers of good products. And the way this works is buyers rate sellers based on their experience, and sellers with good ratings tend to be more trusted. Of course, once you introduce any system like this, it's natural to ask, how do people react to it? And that kind of system can easily induce gaming behavior. Sellers may be tempted to exploit those reputations by creating multiple identities or perhaps by building a high reputation, then exploiting it. But in any case, that reputation system has the potential to at least provide some kind of insurance to buyers and therefore be valuable to sellers. And of course, generate more trade, which is good for eBay. The same sort of thing happens in a little bit more complicated way on Google, where if you look at keyword-based advertising on Google, Google takes into account ad quality in terms of what they display to people who do searches, at least what they display near the top of the page. And the idea is very much like the market for lemons. Advertisers know more about the value of the pages that their ads link to than do the users who are thinking about clicking on those links. Advertisers in some cases have an incentive to mislead users, but if users think that they're going to be misled, they don't want to click on the links. If they think they're not going to be misled, they do want to click on the links. So whether links get clicked on and whether ads are valuable depends on what users expect. If users think links are bad, then they don't click on them so much. That generates less revenue for Google. So Google is interested in being sure that there's a signal out there that ads are actually of high quality, and they do this by taking into account ad quality. They try to prevent advertisers from providing bad links because that's good for the advertisers who provide good links, and it's good for Google because it generates more revenue from their keyword-based advertising. Next time we'll look at these kinds of markets and we'll apply it to real markets for health insurance and for job applicants.